Here's a guy who thinks he can prove that a god exists.
Has anyone ever asked you to prove that God exists? Well, today I will present you with a way that you can provide overwhelming evidence for the existence of God.
How do you give evidence for the existence of something that is capable of existing independent of space and time? That's not even coherent. It would be like giving evidence that 2 + 2 = 5.
If you are one that does not believe in God, read on and see why we Christians fully accept the concept of God, the creator of the universe and everything in it. In a criminal court, the prosecutor has to prove that the defendant is guilty. How does the prosecutor go about proving that the defendant is guilty? He provides evidence. Likewise, when someone asks us to prove that God exists, we also then just simply need to provide evidence that God exists. In today's video, I will be sharing with you 3 evidences that you can provide to others as proof that God exists.
It's rare that I hear anyone who isn't a creationist use the word evidences.
To believe in Darwinism, you must accept the fact that nothing produces everything.
No, I don't. When did Darwin ever say that? I don't believe that there ever was nothing. I don't believe that the universe was produced by nothing any more than theists believe that God was produced by nothing.
Think about that for just one moment. Nothing produces everything. We start with nothing, just a dark, black void of nothing.
A dark black void is something. Nothing wouldn't even be a dark black void. And we didn't start with nothing because there was never a time when there ever was nothing. This should be obvious given that at all points in time, at the very least, time would exist. Even if time hasn't existed infinitely and time had an earliest moment, that earliest moment would not have been preceded by nothing, because if there is no time prior to time's earliest moment, that moment could not be preceded at all.
Then we end up with the universe fully created and the earth teeming with animals.
It wasn't created because there was never a time when its most fundamental elements didn't already exist, and you can't create something at a time when it already exists. Also, you're leaving out quite a bit of the story. We know a lot about how the universe changed from an infinitely dense singularity to being filled with matter in all of its current configurations. This wasn't some mysterious spontaneous occurrence.
Does that make any sense whatsoever?
It makes more sense than the idea of a being that can exist independent of any universe. That would require this being to be able to exist without having a location in space and time, since it created space and time. What would it mean for something to exist without that existence manifesting anywhere or at any time? That's a contradiction.
Of course it doesn't. Webster's dictionary defines nothing as not anything, no single thing, nil, zero. If even one single atom existed, would that be nothing? Of course not. But yet, atheists and Darwinists would expect you to believe otherwise.
Who says that? Who says that an atom is nothing?
They claim that all matter and energy in the universe was created at the moment of the Big Bang.
No, we don't. I don't believe that it was created at all. Either the universe's existence predates the Big Bang, or time itself began at the Big Bang. Either way, there was never a time when the universe didn't already exist, and thus it did not need to be created, and in fact could not have been created, given that you can't create something at a time when it already exists.
Rewind years before that. They told the world that the universe had existed forever.
And that still hasn't been ruled out.
However, that claim was destroyed by a now famous astronomer named Edwin Hubble.
No, it wasn't. It is perhaps the case that time itself began at the Big Bang, but we can't be sure this is the case. This is still debated among physicists.
Edwin Hubble observed and proved that the universe was expanding. So if the universe is expanding, that means that at some point it came into existence.
That doesn't follow. What physicists inferred from the expansion of the universe is that it was denser in the past. They hypothesized that it was at one time an infinitely dense singularity that would produce a universe awash in radiation shortly after it began to expand, and this was corroborated when that radiation was discovered. This does not rule out the possibility that the universe existed as a singularity for some time prior to the expansion that we call the Big Bang.
But from what? Surely not nothing. The Bible says in Genesis chapter 1, "In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth."
This is likely a mistranslation. Dan McClellan has explained that a better translation would be "when God began creating the heavens and the earth."
In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. That's not quite accurate. Now, I've seen a lot of people say it should be "in a beginning, God created the heavens and the earth." And that's also not quite accurate, or at least it's incomplete, because that first word in Hebrew, Bereshit, is indeed indefinite. It's lacking the definite article, but that's because it's the first element in a construct phrase, and the first element in a construct phrase cannot take the definite article. It adopts the definiteness from whatever follows. And in Genesis 1:1, what follows is this clause, God created the heavens and the earth, and that's a reference to a specific event, so it is definite, so the first word adopts that definiteness. So if we were to translate it very literally from the Hebrew, it would be an incomplete sentence. It would be a temporal clause that literally said, "in the beginning of God creating the heavens and the earth." More idiomatically in English, we would render, "when God began to create the heavens and the earth." And then verses 2 and 3 would finish the sentence by describing the state of affairs. When God began to create the heavens and the earth was empty and desolate, and the Spirit of God was moving over the abyss, or over the depths.
Genesis doesn't talk about an absolute beginning of the universe per se.
Note the word beginning.
Note that the original Hebrew uses the word to mean the beginning of God creating the heavens and the earth, not the beginning of the universe per se.
The universe began to exist, and God created the universe. Jesus was there not only before time, he was there before matter.
What exactly does before time mean? How is that not a contradiction?
Jesus existed before both time and matter.
What was he made of if he wasn't made of matter?
Think about what God did throughout all the accounts of the Bible. Okay then, let's move on to argument number 2. Non-life produces life.
What do you think life is? The only thing that all living things have, and no non-living things have, is self-replicating nucleotide chains. If you think life came from God, does God have DNA or RNA? If you define life differently, what definition do you use? How is something that is not even made of matter a biological organism?
We humans are carbon-based life forms. This pencil is carbon-based as well.
That's because it's made of wood, which came from a life form.
Essentially, what the atheists are telling us is that this pencil can create life.
You're making a fallacy called affirming the consequent. You're arguing that since atheists say that life is based on carbon and a pencil is made of carbon, atheists therefore believe that life can be based on a pencil. That's like arguing that since dogs are mammals, to say that a cat is a mammal is to say that a cat is a dog. To say that life is based on carbon in no way implies that everything made of carbon can turn into life.
Once again, does that make any sense whatsoever?
It sure doesn't.
The law of biogenesis states that life only arises from pre-existing life.
So if it comes from God, how is God a form of life? What do you think it means to be alive?
Not from non-living material. That makes more sense, doesn't it? That pencil will never create a living organism, will it?
Neither will a spooky woo-woo ghost who lives in the sky.
However, an amoeba can easily create another living thing. So if only pre-existing life can create life,
This is not a consistent rule. Abiogenesis happened.
then how did the first living thing come to be? From a Christian perspective, it's quite simple. The Bible says in Genesis chapter 1, verse 19, "And God said, let the water teem with living creatures, and let the birds fly above the earth across the vault of the sky."
If those were the first forms of life, then they don't come from previously existing life, and you've just contradicted yourself.
Recall, God is before time.
Before time is a contradiction. Before is a temporal orientation, and nothing can have a temporal orientation independent of time.
And is an intelligent, supernatural being with endless power. So either we can accept that God is the creator of not only the universe, but also all living things, including us, or we have to accept that some non-living thing, like our pencil, can create life.
Given that life is made of nothing but non-living chemicals, why would it be so far-fetched to infer that those non-living chemicals can create life?
Now let's move on to our third and last point. Disorder produces information. Let's pretend that you are on a deserted island. You are walking down the beach, and suddenly you come across something in the sand. You stare at it. Does it look like disorder? That is, something completely random? Or does this appear more as something that is ordered and contains information?
Since the universe is largely non-random, why would you infer that information in nature must be a product of randomness if there is no God?
SOS is an internationally recognized distress signal. Do you think that the SOS could be etched into the beach sand by the random nature of ocean waves?
No, but not because ocean waves are random, they're not. Ocean waves do follow a non-random pattern. They're just not the kind of pattern that would create an SOS. The frequency of the waves and how far inland they reach is largely predictable rather than random. While you won't see waves make an SOS, you can see the effects of the waves on the sand. The wave patterns will leave patterns in the sand. That's information.
Atheists want you to believe that that can occur. Let's look at another real-life example of information. DNA. DNA is a molecule that it exists in all living things.
All current living things have DNA. The earliest forms of life could have had only RNA.
So what is DNA? DNA is an extremely complex molecule that contains information, like words in a book.
Apologists love to say that information always comes from a mind. That's why they like to compare DNA to words or codes. Information is just non-randomness, and non-randomness does not require a mind.
So, and this is so that a cell can reproduce itself. Every living cell has one DNA molecule inside of it. A typical human has about 3.7 trillion cells. A typical human DNA molecule is about 7 feet long. That means that if we placed every DNA strand in the human body end to end, it would stretch back and forth 300 times between the Earth and the Sun. That's 300 times all the DNA in one human body.
What's your point? How is this evidence that God exists?
DNA is a very complex topic. However, all you truly need to know is that DNA is like coded computer information, kind of like a computer program. It includes what we call in computer sciences data compression. It also has mechanisms that can detect and repair defective DNA strands. To you, does this sound like order or disorder?
It sounds like order. Why are you assuming that the existence of order requires a God? The only way this inference would make sense is if you make the baseless assumption that the default state of reality is disorder, and that order can only exist if it is consciously imposed. There is no reason to assume this whatsoever.
Okay, and just to close out this subject, let's talk about the origin of all information. Information is only producible by an intelligent source.
Not true. If a rock falls into some mud, the shape of the indentation in the mud will match the shape of the rock that made the indentation. The shape of the indentation is thus information about the shape of the rock. The rock falling into the mud created this information entirely without the involvement of any intelligence.
There is no evidence whatsoever of any non-intelligent source ever producing information.
So rocks have never fallen into mud and created indentations that match the shapes of those rocks?
However, we have an abundant body of evidence that information always comes from an intelligent source. You are one such source. And God is the intelligent source that created you. Do you think that an amoeba can spell SOS, let alone 300 trillion words?
No, but the non-random natural selection process can.
An atheist would tell you yes. We Christians believe that all of this came about from intelligent design. Check out some of our videos we present here at r120.science. It showcases many examples of intelligent design. And that intelligent designer is God.
But when anything in nature looks like it's poorly designed, it's the result of the fall, right? That's their go-to escape hatch that they use to dismiss all of the obvious counterexamples. To everyone who helps me out on Patreon, you're a big help. Thanks so much.